It is Sunday afternoon, July 8th, and the tropics are still very active in the eastern Pacific. And we begin today with the latest on Hurricane Daniel. As of the 2 p.m. Pacific Time advisory from the Hurricane Center, maximum sustained winds are 105 miles per hour, making this an upper end Category 2. It looked as though it could have peaked as early as yesterday evening, but instead the storm had a mind of its own and continued to strengthen. And no additional strengthening is forecast, although it does appear to be organizing a little bit more on the satellite loops this afternoon. Otherwise, it's going to still dissipate within the next few days because there are more hostile conditions out ahead of this hurricane. That is good news for Hawaii, and more on that in just a moment. But we're also dealing with Tropical Storm Amelia just to the east of Daniel. And this one also is close to becoming a hurricane. It currently has 65 mile per hour winds, and in fact it's forecast to become a major hurricane by around 11 a.m. on Tuesday. Thankfully, the forecast, much like Daniel, is taking the storm away from land, and it will be no threat to making landfall. Daniel continues to impress on the latest visible satellite. In fact, it looks as though the eye is becoming better defined over the past several hours, and the outflow, especially to the north of the storm, looks very good. It is a little bit restricted to the south, and that could be from the dry air trying to filter in, but it hasn't made it into the inner core of the storm just yet, as we do see another very intense ring of convection developing near the eye within the last few hours. So there is the outside chance that Daniel could have a max intensity of 110 to 115 miles per hour before it begins to weaken within the next day or so. This is the regional satellite, and you can see the parade of storms developing to the south and west of Mexico. And here's a look at Amelia doing its own thing, and it looks like it's also starting to develop its own eye-like feature here. So Amelia will likely go on to become a hurricane within the next 12 to 18 hours. And you can see that Amelia is a much larger cyclone compared to its counterpart of Daniel, and that is more than likely because we have a little bit more upper level ridging located to the east, and the moisture profile is much more favorable. In fact, with Daniel leading the way, that is one of the reasons why we are fairly confident that Amelia will go on to become a major Category 3 hurricane. It has more moisture to work with in addition to the lack of vertical wind shear. And in addition to the dry air out ahead of Daniel, this is just a quick look showing the sea surface temperatures and how much they cool off. The storm is located right around this area, so it's right around the threshold for tropical cyclone development, and it's going to be moving into those much cooler water temperatures as it continues to move westbound. So again, Hawaii runs no risk of receiving a direct threat from at least a tropical cyclone. As we continue to shift our way to the east and south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec, we find yet another tropical disturbance. Now, this one isn't nearly as organized just yet, but conditions appear favorable out ahead of this system as well. So we will more than likely see Tropical Storm Fabio form in the eastern Pacific, and that will mean that the eastern Pacific is running well ahead of average in terms of climatology, and that does make sense with the developing El Nino conditions over the equatorial Pacific. Thankfully, none of these three storms are posing much of any risk, despite them being lined up here just to the south of the Mexican coastline, and that is thanks to the presence of this powerful ridge setting up across northern Mexico and much of the western United States. And as of right now, none of the reliable dynamical models are showing much of a shift in the pattern through the short term and medium range. On the eastern side of the ridge, we're seeing a little bit in the way of added shower and thunderstorm activity over the southeast United States, and this is some much needed rainfall as many portions of the south are drought stricken, so we'll take as much as we can get, except of course for those areas right along the coast that have been impacted by Tropical Storm Debbie. Otherwise, the rest of the tropics are all clear, with, for the most part, clear skies across the Atlantic, Gulf, and Caribbean. The latest 6-day CMC model forecast shows the two tropical cyclones in the eastern Pacific continuing westward before dissipating, and by day 6 we have Fabio out there, at least based on this model depiction, with the rest of the tropics remaining quiet. Meanwhile, the GFS is following suit with Daniel apparently dissipated by day 7, with Amelia also on the weakening trend here out in the wide open waters of the eastern Pacific, and of course Fabio, which is likely going to be our third active system well to the south of the Baja Peninsula with nothing else in the Atlantic Basin. Also, the 6-day sea level pressure forecast from the ECMWF shows rather high surface pressures across the Atlantic and Caribbean Sea, so it looks as though the Atlantic Basin will be shut down for at least another 5 to 7 days. So that sums up your tropical update from 28storms.com on this Sunday afternoon. And also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Hurricane Tracker app, where you can find our videos throughout the remainder of hurricane season 2012.